Welcome back to my channel, the Verdant Enclave. As mentioned before, I am starting a homebrewed campaign, which I am calling Land of the Hunter. This starts off deep in the forest, where a small community of elves has formed and grown into a small but thriving community of hunter-gatherers. Now, unfortunately, due to user error, which is me, I didn't set up my recording equipment as I intended to, and unfortunately I was not able to capture the audio during the recorded and gameplay session, for which I apologize. So what you are watching right now is a severely cut down video with me narrating over the top. I'll try to do better next time, and thank you for your patience as I figure all this out. Now on screen, you'll see that the hunter has made a survival check. This is to track down the two elk that the hunter and the fighter are both hunting in order to provide meat for the village. It was made with no advantage or disadvantage despite tracking in dim light, because the hunter had chosen beasts as his favored foe. You may notice that the hunter also rolled at disadvantage for a stealth check. This is due to the hunter having chosen a heavier suit of armor that is still standard equipment, but with disadvantage on stealth checks. Here the hunter has foraged, while at the same time remaining alert for danger around them. This has been 2 samples of Natural Explorer and Favored Foe. Well, 1 for Favored Foe, 2 for Natural Explorer. With Natural Explorer, the hunter was able to find some plants for food, and also some plants that have a silly effect when consumed. In this case, the hunter found some silly plants known as green bark, which we'll find out what that does later. Now, thanks to Natural Explorer, when the hunter finds food in their chosen terrain, they're able to find twice the amount of food that they otherwise would have found. In this case, that amounted to 16 pounds worth of food, which was split evenly between the hunter and the fighter. Proceeding from that spot, the hunter and the ranger found 2 elk taking their rest in the dark forest in a clearing. Now, in full disclosure, some mistakes were made here in the combat. Namely the fact that I as the DM forgot that elk do not have dark vision, and so therefore the hunter and the fighter, both of them having dark vision, should have been making attacks with advantage on the elk. This would have been cancelled out by the disadvantage of ranged attacks being made on creatures who are lying prone. Since I forgot that, both the hunter and the ranger were making attacks at disadvantage. And that's okay. Mistakes happen. And now the first round, the round in which the elk were surprised, has ended. That is a note, by the way, because the hunter and the fighter successfully snuck up on the elk were surprised during the first round of combat. Which meant that elk do not get to move, they do not get to attack, they don't get to react. they don't get to take any actions whatsoever. However, now that the first round of combat is over, once it comes to their turns, the elk are able to move, take actions, and reactions as per normal. However, the fighter, with his trusty longbow and excellent positioning, was able to down one of the elk first before it could take any such actions on its part. I, as a hunter, was less successful. Oh, don't worry though, I still got my elk in the end. A little bit of me trying to figure out what would an elk do in this particular scenario, because, well, in all fairness, I've never met an elk. I was also faced with the slight problem that I had not quite built the map large enough for the actual fight that was taking place. Here, you see that I, as the hunter, by name Varin, was trying to move into pursuit of the elk, as the elk was getting out of the danger zone. Now at this point, the elk is out of sight, which means that I am now making my attacks, as per rules, with disadvantage. Which turned out not so well for my shot. It was at this point that, despite rolling with disadvantage and therefore missing out on a wonderful natural 20, I was able to shoot down the elk despite it having vanished into the darkness of the forest. In the end, it was good fortune all around for Varin, the hunter, and Adran, the village warrior. And so we two set about our next task, which was simply to prep the game. However, having completed that, Varin, using Natural Explorer again, detected the approach of new creatures. Concerned with what might be coming upon us in the dark of the forest, we took to the trees and hid to watch what was coming. Unfortunately, this is where my heavier armor worked against me, and rolling stealth checks with disadvantage was proven to be, well, disadvantageous. For me, at least. Despite that, however, I used my action to prepare an attack, to use it against the first hostile creature that I saw. Following the hunter's example, the fighter also took cover and hid, had accidentally left disadvantage on his roll. So in this case particularly, I went with the first of the two results and called it even, since that would be the result that came up had he rolled normally. So hidden, we watched for the approach of whatever was coming upon our small clearing where we had successfully hunted and skinned and prepared the two elk. And what should come out of the trees but a pair of menacing black bears. As I said before, I had rolled rather low on my stealth check, which meant, unfortunately for me, as soon as they entered the clearing, the bears became aware of my presence. Not so much the fighter's presence, but my own. And so, of course, we began combat. Fortunately, I had the good sense to ready an action to attack the first hostile creature that I saw, so I was able to get at least one attack in before we continued in initiative order, which was exceedingly fortunate for me since the bears beat both of our initiative rolls. This is where I made my second mistake, as the DM rather than as the player, because I forgot yet again that, like elk, bears do not have dark vision. So for the majority of this combat, the bears should have been attacking at disadvantage, while the hunter and the ranger should have been attacking with advantage, as long as they could see the bears. Lessons are learned, and hopefully I'll do better next time. The bear, unsurprisingly, did not appreciate my opening attack and decided to express its displeasure with my behavior in a very physical form. At level 1, bears hurt quite a bit. The fighter, attacking from a hidden position, having been unseen, attacked with advantage. It was a well-timed and well-placed shot. I was definitely appreciative of this because it drew the attention of the second bear away from me, which when you're a level 1 character, you tend not to want quite that much hostile attention. We, of course, were having a good deal of fun panicking and being rather alarmed at the amount of damage that these two bears were doing. Good, clean fun. At this point, I had been duly impressed with the bear's lethality and sufficiently convinced to put some distance between itself and my person, as best as I could while remaining within the more open terrain of the clearing. Unfortunately, that meant I had to disengage, and therefore I could not attack on that turn. Here the fighter chose to use his second wind feature to regain some desperately needed hit points, and his action to equip his shield in the attempt to improve his armor class against this rather dangerous foe. Which meant as well that he could not attack on this turn. Here I let the dice make a choice. If I had rolled odd, the bear that had initially attacked me would have continued after me. Had I rolled even, as I did, it would have gone after the fighter, which it did. Unfortunately, it hit with its first attack and dropped the fighter unconscious. Whereupon, the bear chose to come after me. Fortunately for myself, the bear had started out too far away. As well, both the fighter and I had done some damage already to the bears. This was the point when I realized the mistake I had been making about the bears not being able to see in the dark. So with the bears now closing in, I drew out my short sword and landed the first attack, for which I was very grateful because it subsequently killed that particular bear. Because I had made the mistake with the advantage and disadvantage due to being able to see versus not see, I ruled as DM that Adran was not reduced to full unconsciousness and restored him to 1 hit point. Charitable of the DM, I know. Bear moved up to re-establish negotiations, which fortunately for me were not in his favor. Standing now with a bear in front of me, a sword in one hand and my bow in the other, I chose to drop my longbow to the ground, use my interaction to draw out my second short sword, and proceeded to the attack. Hitting once, hitting with advantage. I had forgotten to mark the advantage box, and then landing with my second attack, a natural 20, thus bringing hostilities to an end. Having survived our confrontation with 2 elk and 2 bears, we took a short rest to recover ourselves. And it was at this point that Varin brought to Adran's attention something odd about the bears. They were each of them branded. For his part, when Adran examined the bears, and examined in particular their markings, he could not recognize the symbol or what it meant, beyond the implication that these bears were under someone's control rather than acting of their own free will. Concerned by these developments, Varin, using favored foe, was able to detect the tracks of the bears leading back the way they had come. With such information in mind, both Varin and Adran attempted to find any of the medicinal plants in the area, but unfortunately failed to find any. Despite that, however, they set back along the trail, finding a point where the bear's trail had split from the trail of two other creatures. Those two other creatures proved to be intruders. Two humanoid creatures with longbows, swords, and armor, who, much to our dismay, found our home village. Attempting to sneak up on them, unfortunately, Varin tripped, while Adran was able to take cover in the tall grasses. Varin was detected, and it became very apparent that these two intruders were definitively hostile to us. Fortunately for us both, because Adran had succeeded on his stealth check and won on initiative, he was able to surprise the two enemies with his presence. As such, we were both able to get 2 shots off, with our enemies not being able to take any actions for the first round. And wisely, we both targeted the same creature. As Adran was still prone from his earlier hiding action, he chose to remain prone, but this caused him to attack with disadvantage. And unfortunately, he missed his second shot. Whereupon, the one enemy moved up, made 2 attacks, hit with the first and with the second, since he was attacking Adran while Adran was prone. Varin got off another shot and was able to put down the one enemy that Adran and Varin had both been targeting. Here Adran used his second wind a second time and proceeded to successfully stab our enemy. Our enemy then proceeded to attack us both painfully. So we had each managed to wound our enemy, but he was not unconscious, and Adran had been dropped. At which point he proceeded to, well, knock down Varin. Fortunately for us both, this was not the end of the story. We had, of course, engaged these two enemies virtually at the gates of our own village. Within moments we had reinforcements, and we proceeded to discuss what we would do about these intruders and what we would do for the defense of our village. As I said at the beginning, I do apologize for confusion with the sound quality. I hope that this has been interesting at the least, and I invite you to return for further adventures between these enemies, Varin and Adran. To make things a little bit more interesting, I will be putting up a poll with this video, and I invite you, the viewers, to vote on what monsters you would like to see Varin and Adran take on in the next chapter of our adventures. Adran and Varin both leveled up at the end of this first video, which meant that Adran received the fighter class feature action surge, and Varin received a fighting style and 2 ranger spell slots and 2 ranger spells. Thank you so much for listening and for watching, and hopefully in the next adventure you'll actually get some of the interaction between Varin and Adran. Thank you for returning to the Verdant Enclave and partaking in the adventure and deciding what monsters to throw at these two. Have a great day.